Local programming on KRWG Public Media made possible in part by viewers like you. Thank you.
This is KRWG Public Media, TV, radio, online. News that matters. Now, across the Mesilla Valley and the borderland, the stories that shape our community. From the KRWG Broadcast Center at New Mexico State University, this is Newsmakers.
Hello and welcome to a special edition of Newsmakers. I'm your host, Anthony Moreno. Our guest today is Democratic U.S. Senator Tom Udall. Senator Udall has served in the Senate since 2009 and is our state's senior senator. He also serves on high-profile committees like the Senate Appropriations Committee, Foreign Relations, Commerce, Science, and Transportation, as well as other committees that impact our state and our country. Senator Udall, thank you so much for joining us.
It's great to be with you this morning, Anthony.
It's great to have you back in studio. I want to kick things off talking about, obviously, some news that's just really captivated our country and the globe is President Trump's emergency declaration on the southern border in order to gain funding to get the border wall that he has been declaring he says is needed. The Senate took action voting against this emergency declaration. Why did you stand against that?
Yeah, and we also had 12 Republicans in the Senate stand against it. So there was a bipartisan pushback against the president, which I was very proud to lead because I was the leader of the resolution for disapproval. The reason I voted, the reason I voted against that had to do with the fact that I don't think there's an emergency on the border. I think the Border Patrol and the various people that work it over the years, if you look at undocumented people entering into the United States, the numbers are way down. We've gone from about 1.6 million to very, very low numbers. If you put it on a chart here over 10 or 15 years, what we've seen a little bit of a spike in is people seeking asylum in the United States. But what the spike is caused by is the president and his people have shut down the ports of entry for people seeking asylum. And so what they end up doing is going around the ports of entry to turn themselves in, which is very dangerous. We've lost 2 children. This is a very inhumane policy on the part of the president. So we have a border crisis in terms of people seeking asylum. And it's never been done like this before. And so I want to make sure that we're clear that there are 2 different things going on. I think if we open the ports of entry back up, that would make a real difference for people seeking asylum, and we wouldn't have smugglers on the other side of the border taking people around the ports of entry and other areas. They're not trying to illegally go way up into the United States. They turn themselves into the Border Patrol because they want to fill out an application for asylum.
Now, you say this is due to the president's policy on refugees, folks seeking asylum in the United States.
That's right.
That is what is causing that issue. It doesn't look like the president is going to back down from this issue or this policy. So what do you think Congress can do to really address this issue while the Trump administration has this policy in place?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I want to give people a little encouragement. There are cases in court going forward by attorneys general in the United States. I believe our New Mexico Attorney General has joined that. I think the courts may put a stop on this. But the other thing under the emergency declaration law is that you can revisit it every 6 months. And right now, the crucial issue is we don't know where he's going to take the money from. They've made some general announcements, but believe me, if Republican senators start getting their projects that they've worked on, that the military has vetted and have been in place for a long time, if you take that money away from, say, North Carolina to repair Camp Lejeune after a hurricane, you're going to be in a very hard place to have those senators end up saying, I approve of you taking all that money away from national security, repairing the Marine base, and building a border wall.
Excuse me, I'm sorry.
Ahead, please,
so what you're saying is that this action by the president is taking away money from military communities across the United States.
And our national security. I mean, in New Mexico, to give you an example, Anthony, we have $187 million of projects that I fought hard for and put into the appropriations bill. The president just signed that bill, and Congress has the power of the purse as to where to spend that money. The president's saying, I'm going to ignore the Constitution, ignore the Appropriations Committee, I'm going to raid that money and send it over here to build the wall where there isn't an emergency. Very, very unorthodox idea, and that's why growing numbers of Republicans, I think, are upset about this, because one thing Republicans are thinking, well, how would a Democrat president apply this? What if they decided climate change was an emergency and just decided to abandon all the regular processes of government and take money from wherever they wanted and spend it on climate change? So this goes to the heart of our constitutional process.
Well, this is something that also folks have been criticizing, is that presidents have been taking too much executive action. And so do you think that this is sort of a slippery slope into the president being able to just start declaring emergencies on just about whatever political issue they want to fund?
I think that's a danger. I think the other danger, and Congress has not been doing its job. It's been ceding its authority over to the executive. We're fighting wars around the world where Congress didn't even declare we should be fighting a war. I mean, I think that we have got to step up to the plate. It means taking tough votes, it means taking the president on, but we've got to do that. And otherwise, there's no point of our existence. We can just hand everything over to him and he does whatever he wants, which I think is a very bad idea for democracy.
Okay, now I want to keep it on securing our borders, sure, which is obviously an issue for many folks. So I'd like to hear your thoughts on what needs to be done with border security, sure, and specifically with our ports of entry that have become the focus of so many different topics.
Yeah, well, first of all, on border security, I think we want to be very smart about how we do this. And what am I talking about there? I think there are ways to monitor areas that may be sensitive, let's say environmentally, because species are migrating back and forth, and you have a national park down in Big Bend, you have wildlife refuges in other areas. You can put in surveillance. You can do this in a much different way. You can use technology, you can use the Border Patrol in an effective way. There are better ways to do this, and that's what they've been doing over time. That's why the numbers of undocumented people coming into the United States have been going down. And the president declaring an emergency here is really trying to fulfill a campaign promise that was a phony promise. I mean, that's really what the heart of this is. We already have a president saying, I'm running for re-election, and this is the heart of my re-election. Rather than governing, rather than listening to the career people in the agency as to what we really need. And that's what Democrats and Republicans have been doing on the Appropriations Committee and the other committees in Congress. We listened to the experts in the agencies. He didn't even ask for this money. That's the amazing thing to me. $8.6 billion. He asked us for $1.6 billion. So now he's raiding the rest of the government. It makes no sense.
Now, you brought up something there, how we use our Border Patrol.
Right.
We are recording this interview in Las Cruces. It's a city that if you travel on any major highway out of the city, within an hour, you will encounter a Border Patrol checkpoint where Americans every day are questioned about their citizenship. Do you support these checkpoints being in place along the border?
Yeah, and I would distinguish there between ICE, which runs a lot of the operations you're talking about, as opposed sometimes to the Border Patrol. I mean, I think I have real problems with the way ICE is running its program throughout New Mexico's communities. I hear from people telling me we feel terrorized. Our senior citizens don't feel like going to their medical appointments because they think they're going to be stopped and pulled over. You're pulling people out of school because of all this activity. I mean, I think the way the arm of ICE is operating is not good. I think it's very threatening. We've never seen anything like this from an administration, and so my sense would be is we have to reform that agency. I wouldn't go as far as say abolish it, but I'd say we definitely have to reform it because there's some real problems there. Let me give you one more example. If you pick up people and then just dump them on the streets of a big city, which is what they're doing.
We've seen that.
You're just asking for trouble. You're trying to stir up trouble so that then you can make the argument, oh, we've got a horrible crisis. That isn't the way the system has worked in the past. And so you have an agency of the government that is really, in many cases, acting in a rogue way, which I don't think is good.
I want to get back to my question, though, and that was, do you support these checkpoints? Do you think they're a good idea in these surrounding cities like Las Cruces?
I think when we have an entry into the United States, I don't see any problem with having a checkpoint. I mean, I've been through many of these. I don't think people should be intimidated at checkpoints. I hear of people traveling through. I watch them. I've observed them and been there. Most of the time, they don't even ask for identification. I mean, most of the time that I'm watching the Border Patrol, but we're talking about drug smuggling too. I think it's important that at some of these points that you have big commercial vehicles where you're bringing things through, that drugs are buried internally. That's another area we need a lot better. We need a lot better investment in technology. So if you're hauling, say, a big truck of potatoes and buried in the middle is millions of dollars of drugs, you can, with a click, look at it and say, oh, well, you've got something in there we want to inspect, rather than burdening everyone. I think we can do the checkpoints and the surveillance and the things that we don't want happening. I mean, guns are being smuggled into Mexico that go into the cartels. We don't want that happening from our side. So I think there's a lot of good reform we can do, and it's mixed up in what the president has done is calling this an emergency and trying to build a wall that we don't need.
Yeah, I want to move on. We have so many topics. Immigration, obviously. Representatives in the House have put forward legislation for a DREAM Act. And I'd like to hear your thoughts on a DREAM Act actually being passed in Congress in 2019.
Well, I think we're going to get a DREAM Act out of the House. I don't have any doubt about it. I wish we had the Senate in a place that Senator McConnell would put it on the floor. Unfortunately, in the Senate, we have a very hard time even taking votes on things. The place has been shut down by the leadership. I hope this is an issue. We can get bipartisan support, and we can get 60 of us to say, I don't care what's happening, we're going to put this on the floor because it's so important for the American people. I believe in the dreamers. These young people are so remarkable, the work they've done, the careers they're pursuing. This is the only country they've ever known. And by the way, there are more than the dreamers. There are millions of people that are a part of the fabric of our life in the United States of America that we should, so long as they don't have criminal backgrounds and are doing bad things here, we should put them on a path to earn citizenship in the United States of America.
So I'd like to hear something from you to what you would say to people who are dreamers, who are in DACA right now, who have been here out of no choice of their own, but grown up in the United States and made it their own. What do you have to say to those dreamers who may be very frustrated right now because they've been working on this legislation, many since they were kids?
Yeah, and I don't blame them, and I totally sympathize with their frustration. I would first tell them, I'm fighting for you. Ever since I've been in the Congress, I've believed in you, I'm fighting for you. Unfortunately, this has been politicized. You have a president now who talks in racist tones, who basically has said that Hispanics and others coming in through the border are criminals and rapists and crooks, and we don't want them, they're bad people. I mean, this has stirred up a huge amount of hatred in our country. I mean, I heard somebody say the other day, you're not going to make America great again by making America hate again. And that's what I really believe is happening here. And it's a tough fight we're in, but I'd say the final thing to dreamers, don't give up. Keep fighting. We're behind you. We're going to get this done together.
Okay, I want to move on to healthcare. Obviously, impacts everyone in our country. Many in New Mexico. We have around 800,000 on Medicaid. There's been this push that we've heard that's become more mainstream, and that is the push for Medicare for all. Do you support that proposal?
Yes, I do. Yes, I do. And let me tell you, the way I would say it, rather than just quoting the proposal, is first of all, I will work with anyone to make sure that we move New Mexico and the nation forward so that every single one of our citizens can get quality health care, affordable health care. And I'm looking at all sorts of alternatives. I'm not just banking all my hope in Medicare for all. I think we should look at what the governor's doing, Medicaid buy-in, not Medicare, in the state of New Mexico. I would back that at the federal level. I'm on legislation there. I think we should look at a buy-in in terms of people 55 to 65 into Medicare. So there are a lot of alternatives. The CHIPS program does a lot for young people. So there are a lot of things that we can do.
Well, there's a lot of concern about how to pay for a proposal such
Right.
as Medicare for all. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think the proposals that are out there are going to end up saving money. The thing that I've learned from doctors and patients is many of these insurance companies, on the insurance company side of this, spend a third more than Medicare by the hassling they're doing, the denials, and I've had doctors tell me a third of my staff is there to deal with insurance companies, not give medical care, and they're very mad about that, and they want to see this changed. And there's a movement to change it, and that's why I'm backing Medicare for all.
Now, I want to talk with you about something that has to do with foreign relations. You obviously sit on that committee. You took action recently with Senator Rand Paul to propose to get the United States out of Afghanistan. I'd like to hear why you put that forth.
Sure. You bet. We've been in Afghanistan for 17 years. We're in an endless war. We have once again ceded our authority to the president, and nobody has the guts to really stand up and say, this is the time to end it. Congress has the authority to declare war. It also has the authority to end wars, and that's what I mean. Step up to the plate and say, this is the time to end it. And we do it in an orderly way. We call for a plan within 45 days. Within 1 year, we have the withdrawal. And the most important thing is to repeal the authorization of force that got us into Afghanistan, because that's being used by presidents now to fight wars that have nothing to do with what I voted for in 2001 to go into Afghanistan, because our country had been attacked by terrorists in the United States with the planes. Everybody saw those planes going into the big buildings in New York City. So the last thing, let me say there, Anthony, is it's really clear to me within a short period of time we achieved all of our objectives. And so why are we there now 17 years later?
What do you think is the reason why there has been so many issues in Afghanistan, in the Middle East after the Iraq War? We've seen atrocities in Syria happening. We see major humanitarian crisis in Yemen. Working on the Foreign Relations Committee and trying to work with other countries to perhaps come to a resolution with many of these issues. I mean, what are your thoughts on the United States being called something like the policeman of the world in a ways? And that's really what's been going on here. But I'm kind of curious on your thoughts on how do we perhaps get out of this in a way to where we can keep diplomacy and relations with these other countries?
Yeah, well, you're absolutely right. And I agree that we are being the policeman in the world, that we're doing that too much. And that's once again an overextension of that presidential power. Congress is the one that should declare war. If we're going to send our combat troops into hostilities, Congress should be doing that. We are doing that in many countries now without that authorization. And so as a separate and equal branch of government, we need to step up to the plate. The big reason we're there has a lot to do with oil and energy. And what we should be doing in America is committing ourselves to 100% renewable energy on a very short order, talking in the terms of 2040, 2045, move us along in that direction. Then we don't need to be invading countries because we want them to be stabilized so we can get their oil out. And I voted against the war in Iraq. I thought that was a war we never should have fought. The country at the time, through their representatives, got a vote to go in, but once again, look, we're in an endless war there. And at one point the country asked us to leave, so then they asked us to come back. They don't have their act together. And so let's put some responsibility when we talk about being the policeman of the world. Every one of these countries should be their own policeman. When I talk about policemen, this is local governance. They should take care of their local terrorists. They should take care. And we should be focusing on terrorists of global reach. That's what George W. Bush talked about, terrorists of global reach, people that could get so organized and raise a lot of money and be sophisticated enough to penetrate our defenses and get into the United States of America. That's what we should be focused on, not fighting every little terrorist all around the world. That's the responsibility of regions and countries to take that action on themselves.
Well, a lot of folks say
do
that
it themselves.
A lot of folks say that the military-industrial complex, the lobby of that industry is so powerful that lawmakers won't even vote against it. You mentioned that the Senate can't even take up votes to address many important issues. What do you think people need to do to really put the pressure on their elected officials to start listening to what you're saying right now?
Yeah, well, that has something to do with it, what you mentioned. Also, the other part is the citizens really weighing in. We have town hall meetings going on all along around New Mexico and other places. Citizens can step up and say, I don't want to be in a bunch of endless wars. I want to be investing in America, in America's priorities, in healthcare and education, making sure that our democracy is strong. That's what folks ought to be doing. Now,
we only have a few minutes left, but I want to address something you brought up, and that was moving to renewable energy. The issue of climate change in the world, some say we're at a point of no return to taking action on it. Obviously, the Trump administration withdrew the United States from the Paris Climate Accord. What are your thoughts on what the United States needs to do? Obviously, New Mexico has already taken steps towards addressing renewable energy in the state. What are some things that we have to do as a country to make sure that we're taking on climate change and investing in renewable energy, but not hurting the people who may lose their jobs if a coal-powered fire plant shuts down in their community? What are some things that we need to consider?
Well, the first thing we ought to do, and I'll be unveiling legislation on this, is a nationwide renewable energy standard, and get that out into the marketplace. More than a majority of states have already released and put in place renewable electricity standards. So we do something like that at the national level, pushing the envelope on renewable energy, and then we do everything we can to make sure that there's justice in the transition. The governor and the legislature, I thought it was very good. They looked at what was happening around Farmington and said, we're willing to commit dollars to see that there's a good transition for workers that are there. We don't want to say to workers in an industry, there's change all the time in our economy. The reason our economy moves forward is we have this radical change. But we should be sympathetic when a person that works in a power plant and making $100,000 on the Navajo Indian Reservation is losing their job. We ought to be trying to make sure they get an equally good job in that region that they can do. And that's what I talk about when you're talking about environmental justice and justice in terms of the transition on workers.
Now, we just have a little bit of time left, but I want to talk with you about something that's obviously on a lot of folks' mind, and that is the 2020 presidential election.
Sure.
Many people have already thrown their hat in the ring. I want to talk with you about your party, the Democratic Party, and people who have, obviously, there's a lot of excitement behind Beto O'Rourke, Bernie Sanders, and a lot of up-and-coming stars in the Democratic Party in the Senate and the House. What do you think that Democrats need to consider during this primary race in order to have a successful outcome in 2020?
Yeah, well, first of all, I would say, and you mentioned several of them, but there are a lot more.
Yes.
I know them all, and I know them well. We have a good deep bench, and so we need to have a clean race. We need to be talking about the issues, and I think the cream's going to rise to the top, and we're going to get a very good nominee, and people should stay focused on that. And the other thing is we need to have a nominee who's going to be able to beat President Trump. I mean, we should be watching what he's doing, because frequently he's focusing on trying to take out our nominees early. I mean, this guy isn't doing his job as president. He's already running again as president. I mean, the way I grew up, you engage in a campaign late in an election year, not the off year when you should be governing and doing the work of the people, being bipartisan, working with both parties. And I don't even know what his real agenda is except to get reelected 2 years into this whole process, which is kind of outrageous.
We have just under a minute left, but some of these candidates have taken a step in saying that they're not taking any political action money, that they want a grassroots campaign. Do you think this is a wise idea, considering as we look at past elections, you have to raise nearly $1 billion to be president?
Well, let me tell you, I've got a big package called the For the People. I'm the leader in the Senate to reform our democracy. We need to lessen the impacts of the PAC money, the big money, the money from the wealthy. I'm for opening up the process, doing matching money so that smaller contributors can do better. We've seen several candidates in the last couple of presidentials that raised all their money from small donations. And so people are sympathetic to that. They love the idea of sending in $25 every couple of months and supporting a candidate, knowing that he or she is accountable to them. So I would ask people, look at that For the People Act, advocate for it. We're going to introduce it when I get back to Washington and fight for that to get that done. It's already passed the House. It's the first bill that Nancy Pelosi said we should pass.
Well, we look forward to talking with you more about that. Unfortunately, we are out of time. Senator Udall, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Sorry we couldn't cover all your subjects.
And we want to thank you for joining us for Newsmakers this week. Join us on KRWG Radio every weekday. It's morning edition 5 to 9, fresh air at 11, followed by Here and Now at noon to 2. And of course, All Things Considered in the afternoon, 4 to 7. KRWG News is always online at our website, krwg.org. And we want to hear from you. Email us your story ideas and video submissions. The address to us is feedback@nmsu.edu. I'm Anthony Moreno. Have a great week.